When we're playing Poppy Playtime, we don't take the time to stop and realize just how crazy everything here really is. I mean, this factory is so big that we haven't even explored the entire thing in 4 chapters. They managed to create literal biological miracles by bringing toys to life, and somehow they managed to do it all just by selling toys. Which leads me to believe that Playtime Co. made a ton of money when they were still up and running, because if they're able to make literal toys come to life, which would probably save millions of people's lives in the real world, and yet did it inside of the comfort of their own building, that's a little crazy for me. So how much did they make? Well, the first clue is in the very first VHS tape that we received before going back to the factory. In the tape, we see a commercial for the Poppy Playtime doll, the world's most incredible doll that children could talk to and she'd respond back. But in the commercial, we see 2 prices. The first is that Poppy was $5.99 and the second was that a factory tour was $2.99. And although you may think that this would be like $10 to $15 in today's money, well, if this commercial was made around 1950, the time when Poppy was originally created, then this doll would be almost $80. Just showing that although Poppy was an incredibly popular toy, because of the advanced technology that it had, it cost a pretty penny. And in the tape, we see that they were selling a lot of these toys. We see literal assembly lines carrying the Poppy heads, almost as if they were creating like 1,000 of these per day. So let's do the math on that. 80 times 1,000 would mean that they would be making $80,000 just from the Poppy Playtime doll alone. And if they worked 6 days per week, then we'd multiply that by 313, which would add up to $25 million. But then again, that is a very loose estimate, and we don't know exactly how many poppies that they were making per day. But considering the fact that their factory is the size of a literal NFL stadium, then it doesn't seem to be too far-fetched, because in multiple shots, we see just how massive the Playtime Co. factory really was. As in chapter 3, during the news segment, we see a shot of the outside of the factory showing that it was massive, which also confirms that what we see on the chapter 1 loading screen is really the Poppy Playtime factory and not an exaggeration. And if you look at the size of this thing and realize just how much it would cost to build the outside and just how much it would cost to buy all of this machinery that makes the toys on the inside, then you're looking at, I don't even know how much money, bro. I'm not even gonna try to guess, but you can see that it would be a lot. And in order to pay for all of these things, they had to have been making a lot in profits. And looking at the screenshot from a video uploaded on Mob's YouTube channel, we see a map showing where Playtime Co. was located, likely somewhere far away from society. And then combining that with the hallucination we see in the counselor's office, we can see the Playtime Co. factory was shrouded by many trees. It's possible they chose this location due to the fact that it would be far away from any police who might check up on the orphans in play care, or even come across experiments that escape. As one time, Huggy did manage to escape the factory and make it to a suburban home. So although the remote location might mean that the land was cheaper, the factory itself was so big that I wouldn't be surprised that they were selling 1,000 poppies per day. But then looking at the inside of Playtime Co., it's even bigger than the outside, as the factory has a lot of things deep underground. For example, the game station, play care, the prison, and even the labs. Just showing that although this thing was massive on the outside, it's 10 times as big on the inside. And constructing all of these things takes a lot of money. And we even see this in a note in chapter 2, where Eddie M.N. Ritterman writes a letter to Warrenbach Construction where he offers to pay $100,000 for them to keep this project under wraps. And if this letter was written in 1990, that would be about $250,000 just for them to keep the project a secret. But then how much more money would they have to pay for the secrecy of the prison? Well, in the tape, we hear a man whose name was Mr. Silva talking to Eddie Ritterman, where he asks Eddie why the toy company needs a prison. But then Eddie literally threatens to throw this man off a cliff. So it seems like the only hush money they got was for the labs. But then again, they were still being paid a hefty price to build everything.
I've got something I want to talk to you about. It's important.
I'm listening.
I don't like what I'm supposed to be building here. Look, the game station, whatever. It'll be fun for the kids. Underground production plants. Sure, maximize production. Makes a kind of sense. As much as any of us, I suppose. But this... what in the world would a toy company need with a prison?
In 1972, you signed a contract. A legally binding piece of paper that says whatever is asked of you, you do it. We asked. You did. So now you do the work, because we've given you a directive.
Mr. Ritterman, we're near the...
Yes. Yes, we are. All of us are. On a ledge.
But although we only saw Poppy dolls in the factory tour advertisement, we gotta remember that they didn't just make Poppy dolls, as Huggy Wuggy seemed to be their most popular toy, literally being on display in the middle of the factory. But I also want to go over two more things. The first is that Playtime Co. was known as the king of the toy industry, and the second is Elliot Ludwig's insane work ethic. Even after his wife divorced him and someone near to him passed away, he didn't let either of those things stop him and continue to try and work towards the benefits of children, or at least that's what his public image was. And when you manage to find someone who is absolutely obsessed with their goal and is literally in control of the most successful toy company, then you can assume that they made a ton of money. But now let's actually get into the numbers of just how much they could have made. First off, if Playtime Co. was the #1 toy company in the United States and possibly even the world, being especially dominant in the 1980s with toys like Huggy Wuggy and Kissy Missy, then they would be making similar figures to the real world's most successful toy companies. For example, Hasbro's revenue in 1985 was about $500 million, or adjusting for inflation, about $1.5 billion. And so if Playtime Co. matched Hasbro, then they would have made about $1.5 billion per year around the 1980s. However, they weren't always this successful, as the company started in 1930 and seemed to only start growing decades later. And so we can assume that in Playtime Co.'s early years, from 1930 to 1959, they made about $5 to $10 million per year. Then between 1960 and 1979, they could have made about $100 and $200 million per year. Then during their peak years between 1980 and 1989, they could have made about $500 million per year. And in their last years between 1990 and 1995, they could have been making around $100 to $200 million per year. And so overall, that would be about $7 to $8 billion in revenue, or $25 to $30 billion adjusted for inflation. So let this be a lesson. If you ever broke, go start a toy company. But what do you guys think? Let me know down in the comments. Thanks for watching, subscribe, and click on this video right here.